Hello, I'm Linda Middelberg, the District Superintendent of the Capital Area North District that runs from downtown Columbus, north to Marion, east to New Albany, west to Bell Fountain. In fact, MTSO is part of the Capital Area North District. I'm also the clergy assistant to Bishop Gregory Palmer. You can see my email address on the screen. If after this presentation you have questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Can't guarantee that I'll have the answers, but I'll do the best that I can. My topic for this morning is the future of the United Methodist Church. Oh my goodness, what a topic. Just like no one could have predicted 4 months ago that toilet paper would be the hottest commodity in the United States, maybe across the world, it is really hard to predict what's going to happen next in the United Methodist Church. But here are some things that I do know. The future is not going to look like the past. We've already seen this over the last 4 months as pastors and congregations have creatively found ways to stay connected with each other, to stay connected to their communities, and to invite people who would never step inside their church door into their worship services. I do believe that there will be one or more denominations claiming a Wesleyan theology. That theology of grace, of prevenient, justifying, sanctifying grace, the prevenient grace that's available to us before we even know how to name what it is. We'll never go out of style, and we'll always have a need and a place in people's hearts. Even if we come to terms with our policies on human sexuality, my guess is we are not done with the struggle of who is in and who is out of the church. There will always be another group of folks that feel like they have been unwelcome in our churches. There will always be another group of folks who feel like they have been hurt by our churches. There will always be another group of people that are missing from our churches that we need to reach out to. And so the struggle to include everyone in that amazing grace will never be over. So that brings us to General Conference. We used to say General Conference 2000, now we say 2020, now we say General Conference 2021. So General Conference was indeed, because of the pandemic, because so many people from around the world would not have been able to get here this past spring. It has been postponed until late August of 2021, early September. The latest news article that I read that was from somewhere around the end of June indicated that there had not yet been a decision made about whether they would accept new legislation. You know, the truth of the matter is there are no rules for what we're going through now. We've never had to do this before. And so we're sort of, building the airplane in the air. So plans that are currently on the table, probably by now you've all heard of all or most of them, are the Indianapolis plan, and we're not going to spend much time with that today because those plan developers are now supporting the protocol. The Forward plan, and you can see the websites there for all these plans. Next had a plan, but they also are now supporting the protocol. And then the protocol, which is the one that you've probably heard the most about, at least most recently. There's also a connectional table plan, which will go forward to be presented to General Conference. This plan has nothing to do with human sexuality. What this plan would do, it was to create a U.S. regional conference. So just like we have central conferences now for any church in countries outside the United States, this would treat the United States in the same way. So we would become a U.S. regional conference. What that would do is it would give the U.S. the same privileges that those central conferences now have to create their own book of discipline. So right now, a country in Africa can have a book of discipline that looks different than the one that we use here in the United States. We don't have that option at the moment. This connectional table plan and the U.S. Regional Conference would give us that opportunity. Whoops. So let's look at the Forward New Expressions Plan. In this Forward New Expressions Plan, there would be 4 global denominations: a traditionalist, a moderate, a progressive, and a liberationist. The United Methodist Church, as we know it now, would completely dissolve. Annual conferences, central conferences, clergy, and bishops would have to choose which of those 4 expressions they would want to join. Local churches, by a 2/3 majority, may choose a different denomination than their annual conference and retain their property, assets, and liabilities. The protocol. This is probably the one that you've heard the most about. If I would have had to guess 6 months ago which of these plans would had a possibility of passing, this is the one I would have chosen. What will happen in the next year as we move toward August of 2021, I just have no way to know. The world seems to be moving quickly, and in some ways and slowly in others, and so I just don't know. That's the honest truth. I just don't know whether this protocol still has a chance of passing or not. But here's some of the main points from it. A new traditionalist denomination would be formed, and there might be more than one. It might not just be one traditionalist denomination, it might be several. The UMC would continue after separation, so there would still be a United Methodist Church. Central conferences, those are those conferences outside the United States, by a 2/3 majority may vote to join or form a new Methodist denomination. Jurisdictions are not addressed. Annual conferences, those conferences in the United States, by a 57% majority may vote to form or to join a new Methodist denomination. So let's put that in a little more practical terms. In West Ohio, by a 57%, if we do take no vote in West Ohio, we would remain with the United Methodist Church. If we take a vote and we get 57% to join the new traditionalist denomination, then the whole conference would go to the traditionalist denomination. 57% seems like a really odd number. It was a compromise between those folks that wanted it to be 51% and those that wanted it to be 2/3. So they ended up in the middle at 57%. Now, local churches, if they do nothing, will stay in whichever denomination that their annual conference stays with. So if West Ohio stayed with the United Methodist Church and a church did nothing, they would just automatically stay with the United Methodist Church. If the West Ohio went with the new traditionalist denomination, then if a church did nothing, they would automatically go to the new traditionalist denomination. However, a local church, by either a simple majority vote of 51% or a 2/3 majority, could choose a different denomination than that of their annual conference. So, Church John Wesley decides that they do not want to stay United Methodist, as West Ohio is going. If West Ohio stayed United Methodist, John Wesley United Methodist Church does not want to stay United Methodist. They want to go with the traditionalist denomination. They could vote, and their ad council or their lead team would decide whether it was going to be a 51% vote or a 2/3 majority vote. Whichever one their ad council or lead team decides, they would hold a church conference, and they would need that kind of vote to leave the West Ohio Annual Conference and go with another denomination, traditionalist or otherwise. In this new scenario, if the church did vote by the rules that their ad council or lead team set out, they would be able to retain their property, assets, and liabilities. So clergy have the same opportunities. If they do nothing, they will remain a member of their annual conference, whether the annual conference stays with the United Methodist Church or whether they choose to go to the traditionalist denomination. If, However, they do not want to stay with whichever denomination that their annual conference decides. They can, on their own, choose to go with the other denomination. So if West Ohio stays United Methodist, a clergy member could decide with or without their church to become part of the traditionalist denomination. I know all that's very confusing, and it is. But I think as time goes on, things will be refined and explained, and it will become more clear. Okay, just changing to a new slide. Okay, so $25 million over 4 years would be paid to whatever the qualified traditionalist denomination or denominations are that are named at the time of the split. They would then, after that $25 million, give up any further claim to United Methodist assets. $2 million would be escrowed for other possible new denominations. Even out of this, there might be a liberationist denomination, or there might be a more progressive denomination than what the United Methodist Church would how it would land. So $2 million will be escrowed in case there are other new denominations to split off. In order to become a new denomination, you must have at least 100 churches that are willing to go with you. $39 million is allocated over 8 years to support ethnic ministries and Africa University, and those are ethnic ministries in both the traditionalist denomination and the United Methodist Church. Property, assets, and liabilities of the annual and central conferences are retained by those entities regardless of where they affiliate. Pension liabilities, per West Pass provisions, can either be paid by the church as they're exiting, or they can be picked up and assumed by the new denomination. The United Methodist Church and the new denomination may enter into ecumenical agreements with each other. What that would allow us to do is it would allow us to continue to do missions together. It would also allow clergy to move back and forth between the two denominations without any penalty. The new Methodist denominations may contract for services or establish missional agreements with United Methodist agencies such as UMCOR. So there's the protocol in a nutshell. You can go out on the website, and you go to West Ohio's website, go to About Us, and go down to General Conference, and there are grids out there that will compare all these plans, and lots of ways that you can find out more information about each of these plans. So what happens next? Like, what happens in the next year as we wait for General Conference? Well, you know, at the moment, there are some churches that are deciding that they just don't want to wait, that they want to go ahead and leave now. There are other churches that are waiting to see what will happen over the next year. Any church that decides that they want to leave now will have to leave with the current protocol in place, the protocol that was put into effect by the 2019 General Conference. And that is, in order for the West Ohio Conference to release its trust clause on the church building and the church assets, the church must pay 2 times their yearly apportionment amount and their share of the current West Ohio pension liability. Clergy that decide to leave with their church must surrender their credentials. It's a pretty hefty fee, and it's a pretty hefty amount in order to leave right now. So most churches, best I can tell, are just holding on and waiting to see what will happen next, even if it means waiting another year. But, you know, even with all of this happening, I see a lot of hope for the United Methodist Church. In this pandemic, I find that very few people at the moment are discussing human sexuality. We seem to have been able to pull together in a common goal. We are pulling together to hope and to help our churches become all that they can be given the circumstances that we have now. Pastors and congregations have found new ways and creative ways to continue to reach out to their communities, to new people and to each other. Quilting groups are making masks. Churches are acting as distribution centers for schools to continue to provide breakfast and lunch for children. Churches have opened their door to the Red Cross blood drives, packing and distributing sack lunches for the hungry and the homeless. Calling trees have been used to ensure that every member in the church is contacted and cared for. Online worship, drive-in worship, and outdoor worship are all being used to reach new members of their community. Before the pandemic, we had lots of things to hope about too. Churches, big and small, have been experimenting with fresh expressions or new ways to do church that don't require a building, and new ways to do things like dinner and breakfast church. You know, almost all of our churches know how to put on a good meal. So how do you take that community meal that you do and turn it into a worshipful experience? Churches have been creating partnership with other United Methodist churches in their area, with ecumenical organizations and with churches that are not United Methodist, with social services and business partners in order to serve their community. There's become a growing awareness and a movement away from transaction-oriented community service to relational experiences. So, for example, if you have a food pantry and your tradition has always been people come in, they sign a book, you check their ID and you hand them a bag of food and they leave, that's a transaction-oriented community service. How do you take that and turn it into something where you begin to form relationships with the people who are coming in? When you become part of their lives, that you pray for their concerns, you help them to know that there's someone who cares for them and it's not just handing them a bag of groceries. There have been new churches started in West Ohio. Now, obviously, the last 4 months have sort of stopped some of that and put us back a bit. But before this pandemic started, we had 10 new faith communities reaching close to 2,300 people. If you add in Fresh Expressions, we were closer to 2,500 people. And these new faith communities have over 250 baptisms since the first two launched in September of 2015. These 10 new communities are also diverse regionally, ethnically, and socioeconomically. And the other thing that brings me hope always, and I am so sad that I am not able to be there to speak to you directly, is that we continue to have new and continuing seminary students and course of study students like yourselves. I asked you to turn in questions that you might have, and I did get a couple, so let me move to those now. Someone asked, I would be interested in knowing if any United Methodist churches have closed permanently due to the pandemic. Well, I don't know if that's true anywhere in the United States, but in West Ohio, there are none that have closed that I know of because of the pandemic. And it says, if so, are the closing of the churches due to the inability of the church to remain connected during the pandemic? You know, all the churches I have talked to, small and large, have found ways to stay connected. Even small churches the pastor has either called each one of the parishioners directly, or they've had lay people who have checked in on everyone. In churches that are perhaps just a little bigger, they even if they don't have, even they have a lot of people in their church that don't have emails, they've stayed connected to them with things like calling systems, where the pastor can put a message out on a call system and it rings out to all of their parishioners' telephones. One pastor said that he's been doing a daily devotions that goes out to all of his parishioners every morning using one of these one-touch phone systems. And he said they like it so much that they're going to continue to do it even after they get back into in-person worship. So then it says, what do you think the future of the United Methodist Church might look like in 5 years? Again, I just don't know, but let me tell you some of my hopes for the future. One of the things I hope, and this is probably going to be a little hard for some folks to hear, is I hope we will begin to depend on our buildings less. I know that many of our buildings are 100+ years old, that the people who go to that church building now are attached to it in many emotional ways. Their parents were married there, they were married there, their children were baptized there. I understand that emotional connection to the building. And yet, Christ doesn't just live in a building. The church, remember that old song that we used to know when we were kids? The church is not a building, the church is not a steeple. Open the door and see all the people. The church of Jesus Christ is the Spirit of the Holy Ghost and the people that Spirit is poured out upon. There are so many people out there that might not come into your church building for many, many reasons. Not because your church building is not a wonderful, delightful place to be, but because of prejudices from their own past, ways maybe they've been hurt, or ways that they've come into church buildings and been ignored in the past. They're just not going to do it again. Or maybe they think that the people in that church building are irrelevant to their lives. That have no connection to the real world. And so I think, and I hope that the church is going to look more like it might have looked in the early days. I think we're going to go back to more home churches. We're going to go back to the fresh expressions, which are finding ways and places to gather where people are already gathering, finding people's what they call third spaces, places where they go when they're not home or at work, and bringing Christ to them. Remember, our Wesleyan heritage did that. John Wesley wanted to go into the Church of England and be able to preach and tell people about the new ways that he was thinking about including all people into the church. And the wealthier people who were running the Church of England at that time didn't want those coal miners. They didn't want the poor masses from the cities in their church buildings. And so John Wesley had to go out into the coal mines and into the fields and the street corners to bring Christ to the people. And so I hope that the future of the United Methodist Church, we will begin to do the same things, that we will get out of our buildings and begin to take that grace of Christ, that loving forgiveness and hope that Christ offers in such a hurting world, to people where they already are. I think some of that will be using technology going forward. And I think some of it will just be smaller gatherings. So that, like in home churches or in these fresh expressions are never made to be 200 people. They're made to be 20 people who care about each other, and almost like an old band meeting in the early Wesleyan church. I think that the Methodist Church, at least for some time in the future, is going to be much smaller, because I think there will be some split. What I do hope is that the split is orchestrated well, because I'm fearful if it's not done well, that instead of a split, we're going to have a splinter. And if we do that, it's going to really reduce our ability to come together to really make a difference with things like UMCOR. So the United Methodist Church is going to be smaller, but I'm not sure that's a bad thing. You know, the church has always been at its best, I think, when it's being forced to find new ways to reach people. You know, when things are going well in the 50s and the 60s and even into the 70s, and everyone went to church, and all you had to do was, you know, build it and they will come. We got lazy, you know. We thought people would come to us. We forgot how to go to them. I think that it's time, and I think we're right on the edge of a new revival in the United States, a new revival to something that's not going to look like the old revivals, but that it's, I think people are hungering for what Christ has to offer. And I think if we can find ways to get the good news of love, of forgiveness, of being able to be part of something that's bigger than yourself, of knowing that no matter what happens in your life or how bad things get, you're never, ever left alone. People need that so desperately right now. And so I think we're right on the edge of a new revival. I just don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So I hope that I'm leaving you today with some hope for the future. I don't think you're wasting your time in a course of study. I think that there will be Wesleyan expressions of Christianity going forward. Each of you will have an opportunity to choose which of those that you'd like to continue with. And I really do believe that the Holy Spirit is moving, and we are right on the edge of something fantastic. So I pray for you in your journey. I am so inspired by what you do. Many of you have jobs and churches, and you're coming to class. That's really hard. I did that once upon a time, and I know how hard that is. And you add in a family on top of that, and I know the sacrifices you're making to be in course of study. And so I thank you for those, and I hope that you will continue to be true to the calling that God has laid on your life, and that you will continue to dream dreams of what we can all become together. Amen.